All right. Okay, let's give this a try.
We'll see how it goes.
Awesome. All right. So I'm going to get started. Welcome to Why Not Change the World, the RPI podcast. I'm Mary Martilai, and on this episode, we're talking about social media and artificial intelligence. I'm here with Lydia Manaconda, an assistant professor in the Lally School of Management at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute.
Hi, Mary.
And Tomek Strzelkowski, a professor of cognitive science at Rensselaer. And I should say that you're both members of the Rensselaer IBM Artificial Intelligence Research Collaboration, which is a member of the IBM AI Horizons and is dedicated to advancing the science of artificial intelligence and enabling the use of AI and machine learning in research investigations, innovations, and applications of joint interest to both Rensselaer and IBM. So, Tomek, your research is in AI, natural language processing, and social linguistics. And Lydia, yours is in AI, natural language processing, and image processing. There's some common ground here and probably some huge differences, but I know that for both of you, the internet is central to your research. What kinds of problems are there with the internet that we can address with AI?
Hi. I'm particularly looking at how people interact online and how language tells us what the relations between people are, and how those relations between people can tell us again how information was spread online, and was it good information, bad information, disinformation, and how we can take theories that we develop in social sciences and try them on online, how they apply to online world.
Yeah, totally agree with what Tomek was saying. Essentially, what is internet? I mean, we have data from discussion forums, we have data from social media platforms, and particularly we work on social media platforms, and I always look at social media platforms as a very good venue where users can hide their true identity, but they can be their true self, which comes with a lot of issues. So there are various sorts of problems that we face, specifically in terms of, as you mentioned, good or bad. And recent days, fake news is becoming more and more popular. So essentially, I was looking at two main aspects, like based on data type, what kind of data poses problems, like, for example, images or natural language text, and also reliability of information, like where is this data coming from. So, for example, traditional aspects like surveys and various, carefully compiled data sets, or, for example, that you and I work on social media data, which is coming from Twitter, Reddit, or Instagram, for example, from my side. So, users are creating this data, but is it like genuinely posted data or data that's purposefully like to mislead people? So, for example, disinformation. So where data is curated specifically to mislead other set of users and create havoc in the society.
There is this, I agree completely, there is this belief that the data that people leave online, especially in social media, that it is more organic. It's not digested by other media, by official media. It's not a summary of something. It's not a aggregation. It's more reflects direct opinions and positions of individual people. But we don't know how representative it is. A Twitter user is not necessarily an average person, and the technology that is applied to this, the AI, is super impressive. It's also not really trustworthy yet. I mean, we can't trust it. If the image recognition system can mistake a cat for a lawnmower, if an image is slightly distorted, then what can we expect about some other things? We can distort any kind of information in any particular way and draw wrong conclusions, sometimes dangerous conclusions. And this is where we, as scientists, need to pay attention to this. So it's a wonderful that we have technology that can handle large volumes of data, but we have to be very cautious what we get out of this.
Right. I Those are brilliant examples that you gave, Tomek. And yeah, especially when I deal with images, we see a lot of times where there are these adversarial examples. So you just change, let's say, you have a husky puppy, okay, and if there is snow in the background, you can classify that image as maybe wolf, like snow wolf or something like that. But without any snow in the background, maybe the classifier can classify that as a husky. So these are the kind of things. I mean, sometimes these are very hard for us as humans to even identify, and I definitely agree with the fact that is it representative of the entire population, that whatever data that we are considering, is it representative? And the representation is exactly one of the things that we both agree, right, Tomek? Yeah.
Oh yes, and it also raises all these issues of privacy and ethics.
Right.
We are using data that people leave behind, but are they comfortable that we're using it? And so what can we infer from this? What can we infer about them from this? Not necessarily what they would expect. People leave data, would say, oh yeah, it's public, I don't care. But they don't realize what we can infer from this, from bits and pieces. And so we need to be responsible for that, and we have to be responsive to the issues of privacy and ethics and protection of the data. So this is another big angle of and big issue for AI.
We're gonna get back to ethics and privacy. That's one of the questions further down on my list. But I hear you talking a lot about issues of trust on the internet and about bad actors and disinformation. And a lot of people, especially at this moment, are very concerned about the opacity of the internet, at least on the surface. It's hard to know what kind of information you can trust, whether we're talking about fake news, disinformation, or just bad intel. So there's no getting rid of the internet. And my question is, are we going to be able to get to a place where we can have trust in the information that we find online? And how? And, in a way, how does your research work towards that? I'm sure it's part of what you're thinking.
It's a big issue. In fact, our funders are increasingly concerned about this and how to protect vulnerable populations, societies, parts of our society from the bad influences. And how to do this, not imposing censorship, for instance. We want this to be a free medium of exchange of information, that people can express themselves. People have different views. We have freedom of speech. At the same time, we want to protect people who are vulnerable from influences that are harmful. And then how do we know they are harmful? Because they have some effects on them. How do we protect them without censoring things? One of the potential possibilities for AI is to be sort of intermediary between internet and you, being able to defend, protect vulnerable from undue influences that may be harmful. So this is one angle that we are taking and looking at how to deal with this enormous open space, which is internet.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we as AI researchers have to call for more trustworthy and responsible AI research. Essentially, with everything going on in the world right now, lots of organizations and even countries, are using social media data to do surveillance on people. And how much are we comfortable with this? We have to ask these questions, and especially the famous article by ProPublica in terms of how United States judicial system uses the algorithms, like for example, algorithms output to essentially categorize whether a particular individual, based on their race, gender, or various aspects that are related to an individual, is it a small theft or a bigger theft, or fraud or whatever, based on that, our systems are making judgments in terms of evaluating individuals in the current society. So essentially we are using leveraging this data that's being posted online, and without hurting individuals and without hurting their freedom of speech, how can we build systems in terms of respecting individuals' privacy and being ethical at the same time is very, very important.
Both of you mentioned something about sort of the internet serving as an intermediary, AI serving as an intermediary, and this would be the idea of having some sort of intermediary that's not censorship. But is it possible for humans to create a system that would not be biased and that would not in some way be censoring?
We don't know, but we don't know. But there is a need for this. We are working currently on a project where we create what I call Alder Ego for answering your email, and it would be just very helpful assistant that could answer email for you. But it also protect you from spam and some other attempts to get money from you and things like that. You can extend that concept to something that is able to navigate the information for you, and it knows you better than anybody else. Is it biased or not? Yeah, that's a big question. We don't know. We don't know if we can do that. Possibly we can. Anything that comes between you and open information may have limiting effects. That is, we know that marketers ship to you. Actually, what you see on the internet is already pre-filtered very much already. That is, you're seeing things that some algorithms think that you should be seeing. That's not necessarily what you want to see, but that's how it is. And maybe this should be improved. Maybe there is a way to make you a little less vulnerable to that. So, yeah, that's a big question. There's still open-ended question at this time.
Yeah, I would like to add something to that from the perspective of the domain that we are considering. For example, when we are talking about a system, so how are we going to use the system? Is it the system that we are going to use in everyday life, like based on individual, like personalized system, or is it something that's kind of like an aggregated system that can be used for by everyone, regardless of what their interests are, what their opinions are, what their daily lifestyle is.
Are you kind of saying that the aggregated system is sort of like old style network news, where the whole country got the same news, but the internet allows you to get the news you're interested in?
So maybe that can be a very good example, or something like, let's say, for example, weather. Weather is very common. I mean, everybody uses the weather in the same manner. Like, so for example, I ask my Amazon Alexa or maybe my phone, hey, what's the weather like in New York City today? And it gives the same kind of response. And it's a very general topic, but there are some topics which are very personalized. Let's say, for example, from the research that I do in terms of mental health, not everybody are comfortable talking about that. So, but the kind of populations that are coming to these platforms to voice their opinions and voice their inner feelings and whatever they are going through can be very limited to this particular set of users, or some other users who are specifically, let's say, talking about maybe, let's say, new dads, how to cope up with dad life, and that's very singled out only to specific set of users. And so these systems are very domain oriented in terms of, so there are some, what I'm trying to say is there are some systems which maybe biases might not be very a big issue, but there are some systems which are very, very crucial, and false positives are it hurts individuals a lot. So that's what I'm trying to add. Does it make sense, Tom?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So we're talking about, bad things, but there are also good things,
right,
obviously. There are also good things. Internet is a wonderful source of information about everybody. People who normally you wouldn't know much about. You can learn cultures and societies and habits and preferences of some societies and strange cultures and so forth. You can document that. You don't have to send scientists in the field necessarily to be able to understand a little bit how people think, or what their preferences, what they likes and dislikes, how they construct their lives, what the meanings of certain words may be for them in this country and other countries. And that is a huge opportunity that can be done quickly. Whether this can be done accurately, it's another story. But with everybody feeding into that huge pool of information, that's an opportunity to learn about people and things that we normally would not know, except maybe anthropologists.
Well, that leads into my next question perfectly, which is about the benefits of working with the internet and social media in your research, and in the same breath, the trade-offs between working with online sources instead of traditional sources of information like surveys, interviews, carefully compiled databases. So can you guys talk a little bit about that? Has that always been your stomping grounds? And what are the benefits versus the trade-offs?
So, first of all, benefits. I love social media. I mean, not just as a researcher, but as an individual too, because data is so rich and diverse. And at the same time, of course, bad things like fake news, disinformation, and so on. So one thing I really appreciate in social media platforms, especially internet, is the kind of data that's so rich and diverse, which is very, very important for AI systems. So whenever we talk about AI systems, so first of all, where is this data coming from? And whenever we talk about biases, so definitely there's data bias and also algorithmic bias. But when we talk about data bias, where is this data coming from? And I look at this, and I think Tomek also agrees for some extent that much of this social media data is very representative of a lot of people. I mean, even though regardless, like for example, let's say maybe Twitter, so Pew Research conducts this survey every year. What is the kind of populations that essentially use Twitter or Reddit or Instagram and so on? Predominantly, like for example, Instagram is being used mostly by teenagers, or Reddit is mostly used by men and predominantly white men, and various aspects. So regardless, and Tomek actually talked about this, like it cannot, I mean, not an average person uses these social media platforms, but I feel like compared to the traditional survey-based approaches or carefully curated databases, social media data is very, very rich. And that's one thing I really like about. And second thing is, like I mentioned earlier, these are the venues where you can hide your true self, which can lead both good and bad. But looking from good perspective, you can be your true self and share everything that you feel about or think about or share about, but at the same time hide your true identity, which again, like I said, both good or bad. And but looking from good perspective, we can actually use this to build amazing technologies that can be used for various communities, especially communities that are so vulnerable. They are coming to these platforms, and these are like their comfort zones where they are coming out and talking about various things. But at the same time, bad stuff is fake news, bullying, misinformation, and trolls, which is so, I mean, it's very tedious and at the same time exhausting too for users. So what do you think, Tomek?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. These are some of the pitfalls working with the internet as a data source. Generally, the social science traditionally works with smaller data sets just because you have only so many subjects you can line up for your experiment. But then you have to worry about things. Is this group representative of what I'm trying to do? Is this large enough so I can actually see the effect? You have to use statistical tools to make sure that the results are statistically significant, that the whole thing is valid. Well, then you go to this huge data set that has millions or hundreds of millions of data points, and say, well, obviously I don't have to worry about the size because I have everybody here, right? And so I can just run my tools and I get stuff out of it. I'm teaching a class right now. When I have students from computer science from all over actually the campus, and I want to make sure that they understand that is not enough. You still have to apply scientific method. You have to make sure that your data is representative, that the results are valid, that the results are significant. It's not enough to run your algorithms over millions of data points and get something out of it. You have to tell me what you got. And so I'm making very sensitive. We read lots of papers and I criticize some of the papers that didn't do that. I want to make students sensitive to that they know that this is they will be future scientists, and I want them to be really sensitive to that. That this is what they need to be doing as scientists in the future.
You guys, I assume, hold a very high standard for how you use information in your research. But anytime you go on the internet, your data is available for the larger world, and we all agree to goodness only knows what in the name of access to the internet. Is there such a thing as informed consent on the internet?
Well, there isn't. So technically, that depends how you set up your experiment. You can do that. You can. We have done such experiments where we created access points for people to participate in the experiment, and that access point provides informed consent. So you consent to participate in the experiment. That's one situation. When you design an experiment, invite people to come. Another is we collect information that is already out there. For instance, Twitter or Facebook, where it is publicly available, and you just collect it. Then you don't ask for consent, and that's the problem. And so, the only way to defend against this is to all the all the proof and everything is on your side. You have to take responsibility for protecting that information. Sometimes it's enough to remove names and other identifying things. That may not be sufficient because algorithms can create all kinds of identity situation that you can still identify people. So then, even then, you still have to protect this data that you are using, and we have all kinds of mechanisms for this. For instance, used during the project, we create some kind of statistical models, and then we destroy the data because because we use it for whatever it is, and then the models themselves are generic. And so we have to be prepared to deal with that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Tomek from the perspective of, I think what I would like to add is companies itself, like for example, let's say Twitter or Instagram, Facebook, they are taking a lot of steps to essentially create this sort of kind of a consent, not to be honest a consent, but so in terms of for example, Twitter doesn't allow you to download the data, public data, and share it online. That's not allowed. Or right now, Facebook is actually, especially Instagram, they used to provide the API to let developers access the information through the API, but now they actually stopped providing the API functionalities because they want to protect users' privacy. And now, in order to crawl the Instagram data, one of the ways is to essentially reach out to Instagram or maybe create a form where you have to get voluntary consent, mentioning that I'm going to use your data set, and ask the user whether it's okay or not. So these are the kinds of things that the companies are also trying to step up, and which is very important, I think, especially in the current privacy and ethical perspectives, so these aspects. So
yeah, and I think standards are definitely higher in academic institutions, also because we are very often funded by federal government, and federal government also has to obey those standards. They are somewhat lesser or less observed in the industry, primarily because especially internet companies use a lot of this information to sell this for advertising purposes.
Right.
And this is huge money. This is basically the income stream. This is what they are. I still remember when I used to work for General Electric Research, and during those days when General Electric owned NBC television, we would go to meetings, and some of the executives from NBC would ask us, what do you think NBC does for a living? And so people would say all kinds of things, make programs, news, whatever. They say, no. We sell eyeballs to advertisers. That's our business. So we have to remember that the internet companies do sell eyeballs to advertisers.
Right.
And more than that, actually, now.
I always remember that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think social media users should be aware of that fact that nothing comes for free,
So presumably your work is aimed towards a better future. And I was hoping you could both describe the sort of future you hope your work will contribute to. What kind of experience do you want people to have when they hop on the internet?
For me, I would aim for trustworthy AI systems, especially where users are not losing their confidence in these systems. And how are we going to do that? I don't know, but one kind of possible solution is to bring humans into the loop and building these kinds of hybrid systems where humans add something and then machines understand that, and at the same time there's some sort of like a collaboration between humans and machines in order to, until there is a solution which is very trustworthy. And especially like we talked about various aspects also, how are we going to use this data is very, very important. So data that is generated on internet, so creating some sort, like for example, is it being used for surveillance or, various other aspects by the governments or any other entities? And so to summarize that, creating trustworthy and fair systems is very, very important. And at the same time, of course, I always say that it depends on the kind of domain that you are working on too. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, AI, to whatever extent it works now, already makes a lot of decisions for us when we go on the internet. We see things that are designed for us to see. We probably have no choice anyway. There's so much out there, and we have only so much time and energy to put any effort into dig any deeper. So AI or the companies that run those internet services, they already make decisions for us. So the important thing is that these are beneficial things for us, that we benefit from this. And it's not only in the individual, but the whole society somehow benefits from these choices that are made for them. It makes life easier, obviously. Removes things that you don't need to worry about, but brings up things that you should be aware of, that help you with the work and so forth and so forth. So that's what we have to do. That's what we have to get to. It may be working for some people already, but maybe not for everyone. And that's what we have to make sure, that some people are excluded somehow from these benefits, and they may not even be able to speak up and tell us that they are excluded. So we need to be able to make sure that that is not happening, that we have this equal access, and it's all beneficial.
Yeah. I would like to add one other thing. So also a lot of times when we are actually building these systems, design approaches are very important to how we are designing these systems, and like especially user-centered design approaches. And I would like to add that especially in terms of intervention and technology development, we have to investigate specific needs and constraints of the target users, as well as their acceptability, utility, and interpretability of these systems, so which is very, very important. And yeah, I think this is a great discussion, Tomek, with you.
Well, thank you. Yes, I absolutely agree with that. So, well, there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, definitely.
And then, in fact, AI is not as smart as people telling us it is.
Exactly. Right?
So, it's pretty dumb actually, and so there are frightening aspects of it. So this is our responsibility to make sure that we use it wisely. It's very strong and it's very powerful, but dumb. So imagine the big wild animal, right? It has lots of strength, but very little in terms of consideration of what it can damage. Right? That's what AI is now.
Well, that is the perfect note to go out on, and that is all the time that we have. So Lydia and Tomek, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having us. Thank you so much.
This episode of Why Not Change the World was recorded in the Soloist Suite of MPAC, the Curtis R. Priam Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center. Thank you to the MPAC staff for their assistance, and thank you for listening.